Hello everybody, my name is Patrick Luck with StoneSoupProgramming.com, and today I am going to show you how to use Spring Boot with Java Persistence API. We are going to use the IntelliJ IDE along with the Spring Initializer plugin, and we're going to program this in Kotlin. And when we are finished, we'll have an example application that you are free to use and modify as you see fit. So to begin with, we're going to use IntelliJ to create a new project. As you can see, I've picked the Spring Initializer project, so we're just going to click Next here, and we're going to give it a name. And I'm going to change the language to Kotlin. You're free to leave it as Java if you'd like. Clicking Next. And we don't need a lot of dependencies here. We just want web. We're going to have time leaf. And then we're going to have JPA and HSQLDB, so that way we have a data source. And then we're going to click Next and let the IDE generate a project for us. Okay. So now it generates a project with this structure here. And what we want to do to begin with is we want to configure the application.properties file. So the first thing we want to tell it to do is to generate our database definition language for us. So we use Spring JPA Hibernate DDL Auto create drop. We're going to tell it to use Hibernate as its persistence provider. And then finally, we just want to tell it to use the appropriate JDBC driver, in which case it's org hsql db jdbc driver. And that's really all we have to do there. So now we can begin by coding our application. And we're going to do that in Kotlin. That's the language by JetBrains. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to tell this program to generate our JPA repositories. This is a really cool feature that Spring Boot offers, and I'm going to walk you through that. So we're going to start with the configuration class. We're going to annotate it as configuration, that way Spring knows to pick it up. And then we're just going to do enable JPA repositories, and we pass it the packages that we want to scan. In which case it's com stone soup programming JPA example. You are free to pass in more than one package because it is an array. Now the other thing we want to do is create an entity class that maps to a database table. We're just going to call it employee. And we want to annotate it as entity. And we're not going to have a lot of fields on this one. We're going to need a primary key, so we use the JPA ID annotation and the generated value var ID ln equals 0. Now, the next thing we want is just two other properties on this class, and we're going to give it a name and position. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with object relational mapping, what's going to happen here is the application is going to scan this employee class because it's marked with the entity annotation, and it's going to inspect each property on this class. Because this ID annotation lives on the ID property, it's going to create an ID column in the database, and it's going to set it as the primary key. Likewise, with these name and position, it's going to create a name column and a position column. They're going to be varchars, and the entire database table will be generated just by scanning this employee class. So we never have to write a single line of database definition language here. We just simply end up with something that's ready to go. Now the other cool thing is, because we enabled JPA repositories, we can make our own employee repository without ever having to implement it. So we're going to create an interface, employee repository, and that's going to extend JPA repository. We give it the type of class and the type of its primary key. So in our case, we have employee and lawn. And that's really all we would have to do, but we can actually create our own custom queries without ever having to implement those either. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And what we're going to have is a query that's going to count the number of employees that contain a certain name, ignoring case. So count by name containing, ignoring case, name, string, and have it return a lawn. That's all we have to do. And the reason this works is because it is able to parse the name. We have to follow a certain naming convention here. So we start off by count, which tells it that we want a count query. By name, its keyword is by followed by a property. So we have a name property on our entity class. So we're telling it to count by the property name. And then containing, ignoring case means what it says, that we're looking for a name that contains the argument name and it's case insensitive. Now, without ever having to implement this class, it is ready to use. When the application starts up, Spring will scan over this class, it'll generate an implementation class, and then we are good to go. So all we have to do next to finish the server code is create a controller class. And the cool thing is we can auto-wire an employee repository right into this class, and it will pick up the implementation of our employee repository class that we just wrote. So let's mark it as a controller. Let's map it to the root of our website. And let's make 3 methods here. Fun, do, get. Model, this is a Spring MVC application, so we're going to do model view controller. For those of you who need a tutorial, there are plenty of tutorials on this YouTube channel that explain how this stuff works, so I'm going to assume that you're familiar with how it works. We're going to map it to get We're also going to make 2 post methods. One's going to let us save employees to the database, and the other one's going to let us fire off that count query. So fun, do, employee, save. All 3 of these are just going to send us right back to the home page. Okay, so those are now stubbed out. Let's map them. So there's employee save. And then we want employee count. Okay. So for our do get, we're just going to put some attributes in the model here, like that. Not a lot to talk about on that one. Now, this next one is a lot more interesting. We have an employee object coming in from the view here, so we want to save it to the database. Now, we have an employee repository object, and I'm just going to fire up my IDE here. We're supposed to get about 18 methods that handle just about everything we could possibly want to do with this employee object. Now, our very first one is that count by name, ignoring case that we defined earlier, but you can see there's count, we have save, we have delete, delete all, delete in a batch, we have exist, find all. This supports paging, so you don't have to You can set the number of records you want to pull back, find one, flush. We could get one and pass in its primary key. So you can really just see that these are very full-blown repository classes here. We're just going to go ahead and fire off save here and pass employee to it. Then we're just going to send a few things back to the view. I'm going to use Kotlin's apply, so that way we can chain several method calls to this. Now, we're going to pass back a new instance of employee. We're also going to pass back this show name as false, which we'll use in our template. The other thing is we're going to pass back all our employees. Now, once again, we can use our employee repository. We're going to do find all. We're going to call to list because by default it's a mutatable list. So we just want to make it a read-only list. For those of you who aren't familiar, Kotlin does distinguish between mutatable and immutable collections. Now, this do employee count, we're actually going to use our custom query here. So we're going to create a count variable. We're going to call count by name, ignoring case, and we're just going to pass it this name parameter here. And that's all we got to do. Again, Spring developed the implementation of this for us based on our naming convention. And then same thing again here. We're just going to fire off some methods on the model class. We're just going to use apply to cut down on the verbosity. And show name. This time we want it to be true, so that way we show the name count. And then count. And we're going to use Kotlin's string templates here. Number of employees having name. And then if you just do $sign with the name of the variable, and then $sign with the name of the variable, Kotlin compiler will insert it for you. So that's a real easy way to build a string using Kotlin. Once again, we're going to want to send back all our employees. And we'll just use our employee repository find all to list. And that's all we have to do for our server code. Now, we probably want to make a temp web page to go with this, so we're going to go ahead and do that next. And I'm using TimeLeaf as the template engine here. So index. And to get started, what we have to do is we have to declare this as an XML document. So let's add our XML namespaces. The next thing we want to do is we want to do our head section. And we're going to have Twitter's Bootstrap and jQuery in this. And then we can do the body. Keep in mind that as you do this, all of our XML has to be well formed or we're going to get an error. So now let's go ahead and make a form. And we're going to map it to our, this is for saving an employee, so we're going to map it to our employee save endpoint. It's going to work on the employee object that we passed back to the view here, which we can reference like this. And let's just define our fields here. We'll set the placeholder to Bob Belcher and map it to our name field, th field, star, curly brace, name, and make absolutely sure that you close your input tag. Again, it is required for TimeLeaf. Now let's do one for his position. And Bob owns the restaurant, so we're going to have him as the owner. We're just going to map this to the position field. And that's all we're going to do for this form. Our other form on this page is going to be used to fire off that count query. So let's go ahead and make that. We're going to map this one to employee count. All right, double check that. That's the correct place to go. And we don't need an object on this one. Call this one count employees having name. I'm going to take the placeholder off on this one. Close our input tag. So that way we don't get an exception when we run the application. And that should be all that we need to do there. Now, our next container is going to be have some conditional rendering here. So let's go ahead and make that. So we only want to write out this div here if our show name is true. Otherwise, we do not want this to render. And then let's write out a paragraph, th text. And this will be used to tell us how many employees have a certain name. This one will be used just to show us a list of employees that are in the database. Alrighty. For those of you who are wondering, I am using the Bootstrap 3 plugin that's provided with that you can add to IntelliJ. So it's really, really helpful to make Bootstrap pages. Okay, so we're going to show the primary key, the name, and the row of each employee. And then we're going to iterate over our employees after we look them up from the database. I did forget we do want some conditional rendering here. I forgot to add that, but we only want to draw this out if we have employees to show. So we can just check if employees.size is greater than 0. There we go. Now, th text. Employee ID. And then how about, let's do the name of the employee and their position. And if we've done everything correct now, we should just be able to run this application without any exceptions. So let's see how it goes. So let's fire her up. And now you see the application starting up. And now the application is running. So let's fire up Safari. And we'll navigate to our page. And we did get an error. And let's see what the error is. These are usually as a result of typos. element HTML. Okay, so there, I forgot my space. So let's try again. So for those of you who aren't familiar with time length, it fails very loudly, and it's very fussy about having that XML well formed. Okay, the application is fired up again. Let's try this again. There we go. If we did everything right, we should be able to add Bob to the database. And there he is. Let's add Gene. And how about we add Linda? Okay, so now we got Bob, Gene, and Linda. So if we search for Belcher, and since it's case insensitive, let's submit. And you can see that it returned 3, which is correct. If we do it again for Bob, we only get 1. So, as you can see, it's really, really super easy to use JPA with Spring Boot. You don't even have to write the implementation of your own repository classes or write any SQL, which is really, really awesome. And you have a full web application with a data store. And it's all tested and ready for use, which is a real big benefit of using this approach. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can see the text version of this tutorial at stonesoup.programming.com. And if you visit the blog, you can also download the source code. There's a link to my GitHub repository. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.